With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, one of our favorites. She is the senior editor for ordinary-times.com. She is an attorney. She is a lot of things in the writing community, and people on Twitter mostly like her. Our friend Em Carpenter is joining us once again. How are you, ma'am?
I'm well, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
How are the HIPAA wars?
It's a very angry HIPAA. Got to be careful.
For those of you not paying attention, since she is a lawyer and does healthcare related things, HIPAA is one of her, I don't know what you want to call it, things of the moment she pays high attention to. So if you mess it up on Twitter, you're likely to get a tweet about it. But today we're going to talk a little lawyer-ese. You are a lawyer, one of them law-splainer type people. What do you make of the ABA talking about getting rid of the LSAT? Now, we've heard this in the news a lot lately. There was some debate, I thought, pretty unfairly during the Supreme Court nominations about LSAT scores. You wrote a piece at Ordinary-Times that pretty much dispelled that. However, if we're going to get rid of something, we have to discuss what its actual use is. So let's just start there with the nomenclature. What is the LSAT? What's it supposed to be? And what is it being used as that folks want it reformed?
The LSAT is the law school admissions test. And just to be clear, what the ABA is doing is they are not, quote, getting rid of the LSAT. The LSAT's still existing. What it is the rule that the ABA used to have for accredited law schools was that they were required to require an entrance exam, an LSAT or other. Some used GREs, but what they have done is they've said that they are no longer requiring accredited law schools to require an entrance exam at all. They still can. And I suspect a lot of schools probably will continue to do so for a variety of reasons. But the LSAT is a standardized test, like the GRE or the MCAT, which is the medical school equivalent. And it is an aptitude test that's designed, whether it does it accurately or well, can't speak to that, but it is designed to determine whether or not a person's reasoning skills, their logic skills, whether they actually have a good chance of success in law school based on how they think, how they solve problems, their comprehension, things like that. So it's not a test about what do you know about the law. You don't know, you theoretically know nothing about the law before you have actually gone to law school. So there are no legal questions on the LSAT. So that's what it is, and the intention of it is as a metric to help law schools accept students who they believe have a chance of success.
We went over this when we did the Supreme Court nomination hearings for soon-to-be Justice Jackson here shortly. Just to tee it up, though, for the trivia buffs out there, how many law questions are on the LSAT?
0. There are no legal questions on the LSAT. You are not presupposed to have any legal knowledge before you sit for that exam. You have not been to law school yet. They don't expect you to know the law.
So just for the people that will never have the great pleasure of taking an LSAT, I'm not one of them because I actually took the thing just on a lark just to see how I do on it. This isn't like a normal test. This isn't just fill in bubble fields. This isn't, flashcards. Explain to people what is actually going on this test, because a lot of folks, maybe they haven't done logic problems and things like this. Just kind of giving a little bit of an explainer of what the test is actually like to take.
It's been a couple of decades since I took it, so I don't recall every section. I know, there are, like any other standardized test, where you have to read a passage and answer questions about it. And but my favorite part is, as you mentioned, the logic puzzles, and those are the ones where you have a list of statements such as, there are 5 people at a party and the person in red is sitting next to Mary. Mary's not sitting next to the person in green. The person in green is eating chicken, and, things like that. And based on the information you're giving, you are supposed to figure out where is everybody sitting, what color are they wearing, and what are they eating. It sounds funny or confusing, and a lot of people really hate those puzzles. I love them. I have an app on my phone where I do them for fun. So that's one of the sections. And then again, I think the rest is mostly reading comprehension and the ability to write clearly.
Yeah, well, that explains a few things about your personality we were wondering about, that you do those things for fun. Em Carpenter, lawyer, joining us, senior writer at ordinary-times.com. What's your general feel on this, though? I know you said this is going to be more of a guidance, but the ABA does have outsized influence. I know you don't think they're going to get rid of it totally, but what is your feel that the reaction at the academic level, at the law school level, is going to be for this?
Well, I think that, like I said, I don't think that a lot of law schools are going to be eager to dump it, to get rid of it altogether. Um, I actually did very well on the LSAT, and it's a good thing that I did, because I admit that my undergraduate grades, they were not particularly impressive. I graduated, I made it through, but they weren't. I wasn't, top of my class or anything. But however, as I said, I did very well on this LSAT, and I applied to 4 law schools. I was accepted to 4 law schools. 3 of them were out of state. So, and I mentioned that just because it's difficult to get into an out-of-state law school in general. And so I can tell you that from my experience, they look at the LSAT score very closely, especially if you do very well. In fact, one of the schools that I applied to actually solicited me to apply. It was Rutgers at the Camden campus in New Jersey, sent me a packet asking me to apply, waived the application fee, because they were actually trying to prove or trying to show a correlation between LSAT scores and law school success being stronger than academic achievement, or your grades from undergrad. Unfortunately, the money they were offering me was not enough to make me want to live in Camden, New Jersey for 3 years, and so I didn't go. But so I think, there are schools that believe it to be a better indicator than just a GPA of one's ability to succeed in law school. And for me, I think that was important, because not that I couldn't have done better in college, but I commuted. For a lot of my time there at WVU, I drove back and forth. I worked full time. My grades weren't as good as they could have been. Now, if I'd had all the time in the world to study, then, I may have done better, but I wasn't in a position to do that. So the LSAT, I think, gave me a leg up to make up for some of that time I couldn't put into my undergraduate schooling. For others, I know standardized testing is a negative. They don't necessarily test well, and it can be unfair to them if they are judged just on the LSAT more than their grades. So I think the adoption of a hybrid approach is maybe a good idea for law schools to look into. I think there should be some there needs to be some weeding of law school applicants, and not everyone gets accepted. There is one school that was known for basically accepting anyone who applied. And it was not an accredited school. Don't know if it is now. It wasn't for a very long time, I know. And what they did was they would basically let in anybody who applied and was willing to pay their very exorbitant annual tuition. And then after the first year, they would basically kick out half the class for poor academic performance, or for not doing as well as they should. In the meantime, they pocketed their money and left them with the debt. So I think there is something to be said for trying to figure out who is going to do well in law school. And that's why this test measures how your ability to answer questions in a certain way or to think logically, because they think that those are the skills necessary for law school success.
Since you brought it up, and it's been 2 decades since you did the law school process, it sounds like this has been an ongoing issue, because if schools like Rutgers was trying to do their numbers and their data on this all the way back then, this sounds like a problem that's just kind of always been ongoing, and this is just the latest chapter in it. Is that an accurate way of portraying this?
I think so. Yeah, sounds accurate.
Great. Talking to M. Carpenter, our good friend and legal eagle. Let's take the other side of this. The argument, you just briefly touched on it, is that if schools got rid of the LSAT, it would increase gatekeeping. It would not allow students, like you said, to get in that otherwise might not have certain connections. Do you think that's a valid criticism? And do you think that's an ongoing problem or a problem that could get worse?
I do think that's an ongoing problem and the problem that could get worse. I think that there is a lot of gatekeeping. Um, and yeah, your ability to focus only on your schoolwork and your academics is a luxury that people with certain backgrounds don't have. I was somebody who went to college with some small loans and a couple of small scholarships and a whole lot of Pell Grant. My expected family contribution was zero because my parents made very little money, so they weren't expected to foot the bill for any of that. So, I had my tuition paid, my room and board for my first year when I lived in the dorm, and then a little bit of extra money to live on, but that's not enough. I worked most of through college, especially toward the end of my undergrad years where I worked full time. And there was just a lot of real life going on. So I didn't have as much time to study. I couldn't spend all evening in the library or all weekend in the library or studying because I had to work. So I think that that did affect my grades, my grade point average, some other things that happened in my personal life at the time that impacted my ability to really focus. So yeah, I think that the problem of taking away the standardized test for people who have um, had an easier time of it in undergrad, might have a leg up, and those are generally people that don't have to focus a lot on outside things and can focus on school, or they have a family with connections that can help to get them in. On the flip side, I do understand that testing is sometimes biased in certain ways to certain life experiences, that there are people who just simply do not test well, that it's not fair for them, and I do understand that. So that's why, again, some hybrid of the two, or some flexibility in admissions is the important thing.
Talking to our friend M. Carpenter. When we get back, we're going to talk a little bit more about that actual law school experience. We're going to lead that into the student loan debate that's going on. Why law school is so expensive? Is that one of those prohibitive gatekeeping things we've been talking about it? And a little bit more about the LSAT. Our talk with our lawyer friend, senior editor at ordinary-times.com, and Carpenter continues on her tell right after this. Welcome back to Her Tell. Our good friend M. Carpenter, one of our favorites, one of the smartest people we know, great writer, senior editor at ordinary-times.com. Make sure you go check out all her work. She usually does Wednesday Writs, but she's been a little busy saving the world in her day job. So that's been a little spotty, but she did do one last week. Thank you very much for showing up to work. Appreciate that. That's a joke. I'm kidding. Let's talk about that law school experience for just a second. Law school has always been prohibitive. It's always been tough to get into. It's always been extremely expensive. Are we reaching kind of a critical point, though, where maybe it's gotten too inclusive, too hard to get into, and too expensive?
um Too expensive, yes, I think is definitely too expensive. Education costs, or no, not the cost, but the cost to the students, not necessarily the cost of providing that education, goes up all the time, goes up every year. um, and in law school, just by way of example, when I finished college, I had about $16,000 in loan debt for my 4 years of undergrad. My first year of law school, for which there are no Pell Grants, um, my first year's debt from law school was 16,000, and I know it's probably a lot more than that now. Obviously, in 20 years, that's gone up. And I guess, they expect that once you graduate from law school, you're going to be in a position to get a well well-paying job and to pay those loans back with ease. I'm one of those who did not go to big law, go to a firm directly out. In fact, I started out in a small town, small county prosecutor's office making about $30,000 a year. So it's not the same experience for everyone. So yeah, I think the cost is a bit expensive. And depending on what you plan to do with your law degree, and if you want to be a public defender, which I've said on here before, in my opinion, is the highest calling of a lawyer. If you want to make your career in public defense, you're never going to make those huge salaries and pay back these exorbitant loans. So I think that's a good argument then for some debt forgiveness or programs for people who take those types of jobs and aren't making the big, six-figure incomes. Um, as far as how much gatekeeping should go on for law school admissions, I think the best way to weed out people who shouldn't be there is your first year of classes. That first year, your 1L year, is notoriously difficult and some people say is designed to weed out those who don't have what it takes. Yes, it's a different way of learning. It's a different type of education than people are used to. Takes some adjustment. You definitely have to study. There's not as much ability to kind of skate by with your intelligence without actually studying a lot. So a lot of people don't make it, don't come back at the end of your first year. Your second year, a lot of people who were there the year before are gone. Unfortunately, that means they may have been left with a year's worth of law school debt that they now may not have the money to pay back. So it's a hard balance.
See, this is the thing people talk about lawyers, talking to Em Carpenter, our friend. This is the same problem every other career field is currently having, where the promise is, well, you get your college degree and then you get a great paying job. Well, the promise is you go to law school and you get an even better paying job. But the reality is there's only so many of those better paying jobs, and there's a lot more lawyers coming out of law school than there are those great paying jobs, right? So
Mhm.
there's a problem with the pipeline system of saying, hey, go to law school and get a great job. Oh, just take all this student debt. Law school, it seems like the law school, if anything, it may be even more predatory with the lending than with just the regular college stuff that we're seeing, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, and I don't think attention is paid to those who are not going to come out of the out of law school with a huge job. There's a lot of deferments and there's income-based repayment options and a lot of ways in which your loan payments can be adjusted, but they all have their downfalls. The lower your payment, the longer you're going to be paying, and the more interest you're going to be paying. So there's a lot of considerations there. Um, a lot of lawyers, when they hear people talk about they want to go to law school, you always hear, oh, don't do it, don't do it, and they'll try to talk you out of it and say, do something else. I would never do that. um, i love I love being a lawyer. I love going to law school. I think it is a noble profession. I don't care what you say, Andrew. um,
I'm glad you
always
do
make
it so I can lean on you and I don't have to do it. So yes,
you
I'll agree with you.
you make a lot of lawyer jokes at my expense. That's why I say that. Um, but I think it's a good profession. It's a noble profession. Everyone hates lawyers until they need one, and they actually get help from one. So I think it's I don't want to dissuade people from going to law school. I don't want to encourage people to take on $200,000 worth of debt for their illegal education. I certainly did not. And I know a lot of people want to go to the top tier law schools, so help them get that high paying job, and it might work out for them. But you can go to a school, a perfectly good law school like I did, WVU. It's not Harvard, it's not Yale, but I'm doing just fine. And I know, I have classmates who went on to firms and are doing very well. So I think that, you don't have to go into six-figure or double six-figure debt um, to get a law degree. You can do it. You just, adjust your expectations, adjust your standards. You can do well and not incur that much debt. It's everybody thinks that you're going to every lawyer has $250,000 worth of debt. That's not the case. Certainly not the case for me, and probably not the norm. So I think that you hear the loudest, most egregious tales and egregious stories, but I think that it's doable. Do I wish that I had less debt? Yes. I wish I had been able to pay more of it at the time. A lot of law schools, WVU included, discourage or prohibit you to have a job while you're in law school, especially if you're a 1L in your first year. You are not allowed to work outside of maybe perhaps a work study job at the law school. So, those are all things that go into it. And obviously, I didn't have the ability to pay for it out of pocket. So do I wish that I could do it all over again and skip law school? Absolutely not.
Is that antiquated though? I mean, is it we've seen it with like things like sports, they've relaxed standards where people can work now, other areas with things like the gig economy, with technology where people can basically work online and make a good living or have side gigs or be a, you can be an Instagram superstar. I'm so told. I'm not on Instagram, but I hear tell there's folks that can do that sort of thing, make money at it. I'm just for the example though, is it antiquated to say no, you can't work a job during law school because with things like the gig economy, there's a lot more flexibility in what is defined as work. Is that something that should be reviewed?
It may be maybe antiquated, like you said. Maybe it's not that way anymore. I know some students worked anyway. I worked. I did. I had, but I had a work study job on campus, so maybe it didn't count. But I still worked full time, so or as close as I could get with that job. But yeah, again, if you're not cutting it, if your grades are not good enough and you're because you're working full time, then and there's other ways they can just you can go on academic probation. You can lose your lose your spot in the class. So I don't think it's necessary to prohibit from work, and that is a good point that maybe that's changing. But the extent to which you can have a job and be successful in law school will vary person to person. But it's not. I agree with you that these days it may be less common than it was 20 years ago. Um, Not sure.
Talking to Em Carpenter, our friend. Okay, you've been open about it. You've wrote about it. You've talked about it. I've talked to you about it because it keeps coming up. Where do you land on student debt? Um, Big push now. There's more talk that President Biden might do some kind of a forgiveness or a forbearance on student loan debt. You have been very open that there was no way you could have gone to college, let alone law school, without student debt. You've talked about it openly. You just talked about having to carry that debt. Where do you fall on something like student loan forgiveness?
Well, it's a troubling topic for me. On the one hand, yes, I experienced the burden of my debt, especially earlier in my career when I wasn't making as much money. But I never, regretted it. I still believed that, we were raised, and I think most kids these days are still raised, and I'm guilty of sort of pushing my children that way as well. We were raised to believe that a college education is necessary, that it's a goal that you should want to achieve if you're going to have success. And I may be old fashioned. I still believe that. Yes, I know there are trades that make a lot of money, and that would be fine with me as well. But I still am very encouraging of my children that their plan should be to go to college. And a lot of us grew up with that. And so straight out of high school in May and into college in August, there's not much a break in between. And I think if I had taken a break to, get a job instead and try to save money, I don't know that I ever would have actually gone back, or at least maybe later in life I would have. I don't know if I'd taken a year off or 2 years off at that stage of life if I would have actually ended up going to college. So, but now I have these student loan bills I'm still paying every month. And do I need debt forgiveness? Me personally, no, I can pay my bills. Right now I have the money, I have enough income to pay the bills, but I'm lucky and I understand that. What I do think is that if there was some forgiveness, means testing, I think is important, would be an important part of that. I don't think everybody needs it. Um, I understand the argument that we end up with a lot of middle and upper class people benefiting, and the people who didn't go to college or didn't get degrees where they're making a lot of money, that they end up shouldering that burden. So I'm sympathetic to that, and I don't like the argument when I hear it of, "I paid my loans, why didn't you?" Or "Why shouldn't you?" There's a lot of things where things get better in the future than they were for past generations, and I don't like the "it's not fair" argument so much. Yeah, I think overall a means tested arrangement would be something I would support. An interest, when somebody's been paying for 20 years and they've paid off more than they borrowed and they still owe more than they've paid off, something is wrong with that system. My loans are not like that, but you know, those are I find to be quite insidious, and I think that those loans are signed for and agreed to by 18 and 20-year-old kids who've been told their entire lives that they have no choice. They've really got to go to college if they want to be a success, and they think they're doing the right thing. And then now you have people pointing their fingers at them and telling them they're bums and they just want handouts. And how dare you complain that you can't afford a car or a house because you have $200,000 in debt and you've been paying it for 15 years. So there's things that can be done, I think, on short of full out forgiveness, that I would support.
M. Carpenter, wonderful conversation. Always enjoyed talking to you. You do wonderful work as our senior editor at ordinary-times.com. I promise you folks, we could not do it without her. Let folks know where they can find your writing and your social media, and they can all follow you, which I should do since I was, I think, one of your first Twitter followers, and I think you were one of my first ones. So tell everybody how they can join our merry band of misfits.
Sure, you can find me on Twitter at WV_S. And you, of course, can find me on Ordinary Times, where sometimes I write long form, sometimes I do my writs on Wednesdays. Sometimes I'm in the comment section. Sometimes, hey, I'm busy. But yeah, please, if you follow me on Twitter, that'd be great. It's ridiculous that Andrew has double the followers that I do. So help me to correct that.
I say the world is as it is, but we'll have to leave it there and disagree on that. You are marvelous and wonderful. Thank you so much. Our friend M. Carpenter, ladies and gentlemen. We'll talk to you again soon, ma'am. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.